My name is Clara Ashworth, and for most of my life, I believed that love was a finite resource, like water from a well that could only quench one thirst at a time. I grew up in Port Blossom, a city in Oregon that seems perpetually caught in a soft, melancholic drizzle, where the scent of damp earth and pine needles clings to everything. It was a beautiful place to learn about solitude. From the outside, our family was the picture of suburban contentment. A neat two-story house on a street lined with cherry trees, a father who managed a regional bank, and a mother who curated our home with the precision of a museum director. And, of course, there was my younger brother, Leo. Leo was the sun around which our small family galaxy spun. I was a quiet, orbiting moon, reflecting his light but rarely generating any of my own that my parents seemed to notice. I learned early on that my role was to be the steady, responsible one, the proof that my parents had done their job correctly the first time, which freed them up to focus all their energy, worry, and adoration on their masterpiece in progress, their son. The disparity wasn't cruel in the way of fairy tales. There were no locked doors or bread and water suppers. It was a subtler, more insidious kind of neglect, woven into the very fabric of our daily lives. On my 10th birthday, I received a $20 gift certificate to Powell's Books and a hug that felt more like a polite pat on the back. I was thrilled, a whole world of stories for $20. That same year, for Leo's 8th birthday, my father spent the entire spring building a magnificent treehouse in our backyard, complete with a rope ladder, a pulley system for snacks, and a small zip line that sailed over my mother's prize-winning roses. Our relatives came. A cake shaped like a pirate ship was served, and my father's face, as he watched Leo ascend into his new kingdom, glowed with a pride so fierce it was almost painful to witness. I watched from the kitchen window, tracing the condensation on the glass, feeling like a ghost in my own home. This pattern followed us through school. I was a diligent student, driven by a quiet, desperate need to prove my worth. When I graduated high school as valedictorian, my parents sat in the audience and clapped politely, as if it were an expected, unremarkable event. "We always knew you had a good head on your shoulders, Clara," my mother said afterward, her smile tight. Later that week, Leo passed his driver's test on the 3rd attempt, and my father bought him a slightly used, but still gleaming Jeep, celebrating with a steak dinner for the man of the house. I funneled my quiet frustration into ambition. I earned a full scholarship to the University of Oregon for their architecture program. While I was there, I worked 2 jobs, one at the campus library, the other drafting for a small local firm, to cover my living expenses. I wanted nothing more than to be completely self-sufficient, to untether myself from the silent, suffocating weight of their expectations, or lack thereof. I'd call home, eager to share a small victory, like a professor praising my design for a community center. "That's wonderful, darling," my mother would say, her voice distant. "Did I tell you Leo is thinking of starting a podcast? He's so creative." Meanwhile, Leo floated through his early 20s on a cloud of parental support. He enrolled in college, changed his major from business to philosophy to environmental science, and then dropped out to find his passion. His passion mostly involved drone photography and elaborate, half-finished business plans for startups that never started. My parents bankrolled it all. "He just needs time to find his footing," my father would say, transferring another $2,000 into Leo's account. "He's a dreamer." When I asked for a small loan one semester to buy a specific drafting software, my father sighed. "Clara, you're so capable. You'll figure it out. We need to keep our resources liquid for Leo's venture." So I figured it out. I ate ramen noodles, sold some of my own design templates online, and bought the software myself. Each obstacle they placed in my path, intended or not, became a stepping stone. Every time they told me I was strong enough to handle it alone, I became stronger. By the time I graduated with honors, I had a job offer from Viridian Grove, a prestigious, ethically focused architecture firm in Portland. At 27, I put a down payment on a small, sun-drenched loft in the Pearl District, a space with old brick walls and massive industrial windows. It wasn't a palace, but every brick, every pane of glass, felt like it belonged to me. I invited them to a small housewarming party. My mother walked in, her eyes scanning the high ceilings and the minimalist furniture I'd carefully chosen. "It's very you, Clara," she said, which I knew was not a compliment. "So self-sufficient. We never have to worry about you." That was their refrain, the phrase that was meant to sound like praise, but always landed like a dismissal. It meant, "You do not need us, therefore we do not need to give you our love, our attention, our pride." Leo, still living at home, was now pursuing a grand idea for a sustainable, artisanal coffee delivery service via drone. My parents were considering remortgaging their house to fund it. He was the project, the investment, the potential for a grand return. I was the safe, boring bond that had already matured and been filed away. What they failed to understand was that the independence they'd forced upon me hadn't just made me self-sufficient. It had forged a core of resolve within me, quiet and unyielding as granite. And when the time came to stand on my own ground, I would be ready. They just never thought they'd be the ones I'd have to stand against. When my grandfather, Arthur, passed away, the grief that found me was a quiet, private visitor. It didn't announce itself with heaving sobs or public displays of sorrow, but settled into my chest like a heavy stone. He was the one member of my family who had seen me, truly seen me. While my parents were busy orchestrating Leo's life, Grandfather Arthur was the one who would send me books in the mail, not just any books, but ones he'd chosen specifically for me, with inscriptions on the inside cover in his elegant, spidery script. "Clara, I thought of you when I read this. Keep building beautiful things." At the funeral, my parents flanked Leo, their hands a constant, reassuring presence on his shoulders as he dabbed his eyes. I sat in the pew behind them, a solitary island in a sea of shared mourning. When it was my turn to speak, I shared a brief, heartfelt memory of how Grandfather Arthur had once driven 3 hours in a snowstorm just to see a model I'd built for a university competition, because he knew my parents wouldn't be there. I saw my mother blink, a flicker of confusion on her face, as if trying to recall an event that had never been entered into her memory banks. She probably couldn't. 2 weeks later, a crisp, cream-colored envelope arrived from a law firm, announcing the reading of Arthur Ashworth's last will and testament. As a direct grandchild, my presence was requested. A fragile, foolish hope fluttered in my chest. It wasn't about money. It was about the possibility of one final inscription, one last acknowledgement from the one person who had always bothered to read my pages. The day before the reading, another, more personal envelope appeared in my mailbox. The handwriting was my grandmother Eleanor's, a neat, flowing cursive that was as gentle and steadfast as she was. We had always shared a quiet bond, a language of understanding that didn't require many words. She was a woman who observed far more than she spoke, a calming presence in the often turbulent atmosphere of our family. I slit the envelope open. The note was short, but its weight was immense. "Dearest Clara, it is very important that you attend the reading tomorrow. Your grandfather was most particular about his wishes. Please do not let anyone persuade you to believe otherwise. He saw you, my dear. He always saw you. With love, Grandma Eleanor." A shiver went down my spine. The words were a quiet warning and a promise. Something was coming, and she was telling me to brace myself, to hold my ground. I took the day off from Viridian Grove, dressed in a charcoal gray blazer and trousers, my personal armor, and walked into the lawyer's opulent, wood-paneled office. My parents were already there, seated on a leather sofa with Leo between them. When they saw me, my father gave a tight, almost imperceptible nod, and my mother offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was the same look they gave a distant cousin at a wedding. Leo gave a small, awkward wave, which I returned with a nod. We hadn't had a real conversation in months. I took a seat in a wingback chair across from them, feeling the familiar tension settle in the room. The lawyer, Mr. Davies, was a kind-faced man with silver hair who began the proceedings with a gentle solemnity. He started with the main bequests. The house went to Grandmother Eleanor, along with a significant portion of his investment portfolio to ensure her comfort for the rest of her life. His assets were then to be divided among his children, my father and his sister. Then, Mr. Davies cleared his throat and moved to the section titled Grandchildren's Trust. To my beloved grandchildren, Clara Ashworth and Leo Ashworth, he read, I bequeath the remainder of my stock portfolio and all liquid savings to be divided into 2 equal shares. The air in the room shifted. I saw my father's posture stiffen. My mother's polite smile faltered. An equal share. The words hung in the air, radical and disruptive. My father cleared his throat, a sound like gravel grinding. Excuse me, Mr. Davies, he began, his voice smooth and authoritative, the one he used with junior bank tellers. My wife and I will be accepting Clara's portion on her behalf. We've discussed it as a family. I felt the blood drain from my face. They hadn't discussed anything with me. It's just that, my mother chimed in, her tone soft and reasonable, as if explaining something to a child. Clara is doing so very well for herself. She's practical, she has her career. She's never been particularly concerned with material things. She turned her gaze to me, a pleading look in her eyes. Leo, on the other hand, is on the cusp of something truly special with his new venture. This inheritance would be the seed capital he needs. Your grandfather would have wanted to support his grandson's dream. The room was silent. Leo stared intently at the intricate pattern on the Persian rug, his shoulders hunched. He was a million miles away. My voice, when I found it, was trembling but clear. I'm not a child. I can accept my own inheritance. My father's mask of civility slipped. He looked at me, his eyes cold with irritation. Clara, don't be difficult. This isn't about you. It's about what's best for the family as a whole. It's about ensuring this money is put to good use, to build something. I've been building something my entire life, I said, the words tasting like metal in my mouth. On my own. And we are so proud of that, my mother said, her voice dripping with counterfeit sweetness. You are strong. That's why you, of all people, should understand the need to support your brother. He needs this boost. You don't. You don't need it. The old, familiar refrain. I didn't need the help, the support, the attention. And now I didn't need what was rightfully mine. They were erasing me again, right here, in front of a lawyer, using my own strength and independence as the justification. I opened my mouth to protest again, to fight, but I didn't have to. Thomas. Grandmother Eleanor's voice cut through the tension like a blade. She hadn't raised it, yet it commanded the entire room. She rose slowly from her chair, her back ramrod straight, and fixed her son, my father, with a look of profound disappointment. I think we should allow Mr. Davies to finish reading the will in its entirety, she said, her voice calm and firm, before anyone presumes to speak for Arthur. My father's jaw tightened, but he sank back into the sofa, silenced. Mr. Davies gave my grandmother a respectful nod and continued reading. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the reading was far from over. A battle line had just been drawn, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't standing on it alone. Mr. Davies, sensing the shift in the room, picked up the next page with a rustle of paper that sounded deafening in the silence. He adjusted his glasses and continued. As I was saying, 2 equal shares. The assets are to be transferred into the names of Clara Ashworth and Leo Ashworth within 30 days. My father's knuckles were white where he gripped the arm of the sofa. This is ridiculous, he muttered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. He leaned forward again, addressing Mr. Davies directly, ignoring my grandmother completely. Look, let's just be practical. Clara has a 6-figure job, a city loft, no debt to her name. We made sure she got a good education. He gestured vaguely in my direction. Leo is an entrepreneur, an innovator. This is an investment in the family's future. Grandfather Arthur, for all his wonderful qualities, was an old-fashioned man. He wouldn't have understood the dynamics of modern startups. My mother, ever the supportive chorus, added, Clara has always been so generous. I'm sure, once she thinks about it, she'll see this is the most loving thing to do. It's not about the money, it's about the principle of helping family. The principle. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Their principle was a one-way street, paved with my compliance and Leo's comfort. I'm not giving up what my grandfather left for me, I said. My voice was steady now, fueled by a slow-burning anger and the quiet strength emanating from my grandmother's gaze. My father turned on me, his face flushing a deep, mottled red. "Pride, Clara? Is that what this is? After everything we've done for you? The roof over your head? The braces on your teeth? The car we let you use in high school? We raised you. We supported you. You owe us your consideration." The list of basic parental duties, now weaponized as a list of debts, was a familiar tactic. But this time, it didn't work. The guilt didn't land. "If you truly loved this family," my mother whispered, her eyes welling up with strategic tears, "you wouldn't cause this division. You would do what's right for your brother. Your brother, your brother, your brother." The name was an incantation, a spell meant to render me invisible. I felt a cool, dry hand close over mine. I looked down and saw Grandmother Eleanor's long, elegant fingers resting on my own. She looked from my father to my mother, her expression unreadable but firm. "You owe them nothing, Clara," she said softly, but her voice carried. And Arthur knew that. She then turned her attention to Mr. Davies. "There is another codicil, is there not? One attached to the grandchildren's trust." Mr. Davies nodded, a flicker of something relief, perhaps, in his eyes. "Yes, Mrs. Ashworth. There is." He pulled out a separate, slender envelope that had been clipped to the back of the main document. Mr. Ashworth had this addendum drawn up 6 months ago. He instructed me to read it only if there was a dispute regarding the distribution of the grandchildren's trust. My father's face went rigid. "A dispute? There is no dispute. Just a family discussion." "It seems there is," Eleanor said calmly. "Please, Mr. Davies." The lawyer opened the envelope and read from the single sheet of paper inside. His voice was neutral, but the words were a bombshell. "Addendum to Article 4, he began. "It is my fervent wish that my grandchildren, Clara and Leo, be treated as equals, not just in this document, but in the eyes of the family. They are two different, but equally valuable souls. Should any party, beneficiary or otherwise, attempt to unduly influence, coerce, or redirect the inheritance designated to either grandchild for the benefit of another, that action will be considered a breach of the testator's intent. In such an event, the party or parties attempting said redirection will forfeit their own inheritance from my estate, which will then be absorbed back into the principal and donated to the Oregon Audubon Society." The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum that sucked all the air from the room. I stared at my grandmother, whose face remained serene. She had known. She and my grandfather had anticipated this exact scenario. They had laid a quiet, perfect trap, not of malice, but of protection. My father looked as if he'd been struck. He opened his mouth, then closed it. My mother's manufactured tears had vanished, replaced by a look of stark, unveiled shock. They had not only failed to claim my inheritance, but in their blatant, public attempt to do so, they had just jeopardized their own. "Now, wait just a minute," my father finally stammered, his voice losing its authoritative boom. "We were not coercing. We were making a suggestion. You stated you would be accepting her portion on her behalf," Mr. Davies said, his tone now coolly professional. "And you argued that the funds should be redirected to your son. I have it in my notes. I believe that falls under the purview of this clause." The color drained from my father's face. He looked at me, and for the first time, I didn't see irritation or dismissal. I saw pure, unadulterated fury. He saw me not as his daughter, but as the architect of his downfall. They left the office in a storm of frigid silence, not even glancing in my direction. Leo trailed behind them, his face pale and unreadable, a silent ship in their turbulent wake. I remained in the chair long after they were gone, the lawyer's words echoing in the quiet room. Grandmother Eleanor came and sat beside me. She didn't say anything for a long time, simply took my hand again. "He loved you very much, Clara," she finally said. "He worried that we, as a family, had taught you that love was something you had to earn, something you had to be worthy of. He wanted you to have something that was yours, no questions asked, no conditions attached." Tears I hadn't even known were there began to stream down my face. They weren't tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of relief. The overwhelming, earth-shattering relief of being seen, of being protected, of being unconditionally valued. It wasn't about the money. It was about the claws. It was a shield my grandfather had forged for me from beyond the grave, and in that moment, it felt more precious than any inheritance. The drive back to my loft was a blur. By the time I walked through my door, the digital assault had begun. From my mother, "I can't believe you would let this happen. You have humiliated us in front of the entire family." From my father, "I hope you're happy with your blood money. You've shown your true colors today." And the one that twisted the knife, from Leo, "I didn't ask for any of this." I turned my phone off. The silence of my apartment felt immense, pressing in on me. The little girl who still lived inside me, the one who just wanted her daddy's approval, was curled in a ball, whispering, "I'm sorry. Please don't be angry with me." But the woman I had become, the one who had built this life and this home with her own 2 hands, knew that apologizing would be the ultimate betrayal of myself. For 3 days, I existed in a strange limbo. I called in sick to work, citing a family emergency, which felt like the understatement of the century. I paced my floors, drank chamomile tea, and stared out at the Portland rain. Then, on the 3rd day, I knew what I had to do. I needed to go to the one place where my family's noise couldn't reach me, the one place that had always felt like a sanctuary. I packed an overnight bag, got in my car, and drove 2 hours east, toward the mountains, to the small, cedar-shingled cabin on Mirror Lake that had belonged to my grandparents. Grandfather Arthur had built it himself, and it was where he'd taught me to skip stones and identify constellations. It was where grandmother Eleanor had taught me how to bake her famous lemon poppy seed loaf, letting me sneak spoonfuls of the batter when no one was looking. The air grew crisp and cool as I drove. The key was exactly where it always was, under a loose stone by the porch steps. The cabin greeted me with the familiar scent of cedar, dust, and old books. I lit a fire in the stone hearth, wrapped myself in a thick wool blanket that smelled of my grandfather, and finally I grieved. I cried for him, for the loss of his quiet, steady presence. And I cried for the family I had always wanted but never had, for the little girl who had spent her life trying to be good enough. The next morning, I was tidying up the small guest bedroom, the one I always used to stay in, when I noticed the bottom drawer of the old pine dresser was slightly ajar. I pushed it shut, but it wouldn't close properly. Curious, I pulled it all the way out. Tucked away at the very back, taped to the bottom of the drawer, was a thick envelope with my name on it, written in Arthur's familiar, blocky print. My hands trembled as I carefully peeled it free and opened it. Inside were several pages, filled with his handwriting. "My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and it also means that things have likely become complicated, as they so often do when it comes to family and money. I am writing this from my favorite chair by the fire, here in this cabin, and I can almost picture you here, reading it. I need you to know something I fear I did not say clearly enough when I was alive. I saw it all, my dear. I saw the way your parents poured all their hopes and fears into Leo, leaving you to navigate the currents on your own. I saw them celebrate his smallest effort while taking your greatest achievements for granted. They called you the independent one, the strong one, not as a compliment, but as an excuse. They told you to be strong so they wouldn't have to be strong for you. You were never invisible to me, Clara. I saw the girl who stayed up late studying, the young woman who worked 2 jobs to stand on her own feet, the architect who could see the beauty and potential in spaces that others overlooked. You have a strength in you that is quiet, but it is deeper and more resilient than any of the loud, flashy confidence your brother was handed. This inheritance is not a reward for your struggles. Please do not see it that way. It is a recognition. It is a tool. I am not giving it to you because I think you need it to survive. I have no doubt of your ability to do that. I am giving it to you because you have earned the right to not just survive, but to build, to create, to dream without the constant, grinding pressure of having to prove your worth. You have already proven it 1,000 times over. Your voice matters, Clara. Do not let them or anyone else ever convince you to silence it again. Build beautiful things. Not just with brick and mortar, but with your life. Love always. Grandpa Arthur. I sank to the floor, clutching the letter to my chest as if it were a living thing. The words were a balm, a validation that washed over decades of quiet hurt. It was the permission I never knew I was waiting for. He hadn't just left me money, he had left me my own story, written in his hand. And in the profound, healing silence of his cabin, I realized this was no longer about a fight with my parents. This was about finally stepping up to claim the life my grandfather had always seen for me. I returned from the mountains with a sense of clarity so sharp it felt like a new sense. The letter was a talisman in my pocket, a source of quiet power. The first thing I did when I got back to Port Blossom was call my grandmother. "You found it," she said, her voice warm. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I replied, my own voice thick with emotion. "Eleanor, thank you." "Oh, my dear, don't thank me. Thank Arthur. He was so worried he was leaving you in a den of wolves. He wanted to make sure you had teeth." She paused, and then her voice grew more serious. "There's more you should know, Clara. Your father is not taking this well." She proceeded to tell me that, months before he passed, my parents had paid Arthur a visit. They had made a full-court press, arguing that Leo's genius was being stifled by a lack of capital and that I, being so secure, wouldn't even miss the inheritance. They had formally requested that he amend his will to make Leo the sole beneficiary of the grandchildren's trust. Arthur was appalled, Eleanor said. It was after that visit that he went to see Mr. Davies and had the codicil added. He called it his integrity clause. He told me, "Eleanor, if they are so willing to erase their daughter for the sake of their son, then they have lost sight of what family means." The fallout from the will reading was worse than I imagined. Mr. Davies had officially informed my father that his attempt to redirect my inheritance had triggered the clause. He and my mother had forfeited their share. The rage, Eleanor said, was biblical. "He is saying you manipulated us," she told me, her voice heavy with sorrow. "That you turned his own mother against him. He has demanded that I step down as executor of the estate. Will you?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Of course not," she said, a hint of steel in her voice. "The estate will be managed by myself and the firm, precisely as Arthur stipulated should things become contentious. Your father has no legal standing." For the first time in my life, a family member hadn't just offered me platitudes, they had built a fortress around me. The realization was staggering. That evening, the fortress was put to the test. A loud, insistent knock echoed through my loft. I didn't need the intercom to know who it was. I opened the door to find both my parents on my doorstep. My mother's face was blotchy, her eyes red-rimmed. My father was rigid with a fury that seemed to radiate from him like heat. "You did this," he spat, bypassing any greeting. "You went behind our backs and poisoned him against us. You and that old woman." I stood my ground, my hand resting on the doorframe. "Grandfather made his own choices," I said, my voice even. "And you made yours." My mother stepped forward, her hands clasped pleadingly. "Clara, please. Think about what you're doing to this family. Just sign the money over to Leo. We can tell the lawyer it was all a misunderstanding. We can fix this." "No," I said. The word was small, but it was solid. Unshakable. For 27 years, I needed a family to see me, to support me, to be proud of me. I never got one. You don't get to ask me to sacrifice myself for the idea of a family that has never existed for me. They stared at me, dumbfounded, as if a piece of furniture had suddenly started speaking. The truth of my words hung in the air between us, stark and undeniable. My father let out a short, bitter, cruel laugh. "Fine," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "Then I hope your inheritance keeps you warm at night. Because as of this moment, you don't have a family anymore." They turned and walked away, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the hallway. I closed the door, and for the first time, when they left, I didn't feel a single tear. A profound, aching sadness settled in my chest, but it was for the loss of what could have been, not what was. I hadn't lost a family that night. I had just lost two people who had been tenants in my life for far too long, never paying their emotional rent. And in their place, I had finally, fully, claimed the space for myself. The days that followed were wrapped in a profound silence. The angry texts stopped. The manipulative phone calls ceased. It was as if a constant, draining background noise I had lived with my whole life had suddenly been switched off. But the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with supportive calls from grandmother Eleanor, with check-in texts from my friends who knew the broad strokes of my family's dysfunction, and with the steady, quiet work of my own healing. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, there was a soft, hesitant knock on my door. I peered through the peephole and my heart skipped a beat. It was Leo. He stood there looking lost, his shoulders slumped, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his hoodie. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Can we talk?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I didn't answer, just stepped aside to let him in. He shuffled into the center of my living room, looking around as if seeing it for the first time. He didn't sit down, just stood awkwardly by my drafting table. "I didn't know they were going to do that," he said finally, his gaze fixed on a blueprint I had pinned to the wall. "At the lawyer's office." "I swear, Clara. I never asked them to." "But you didn't stop them either," I replied. It wasn't an accusation, just a fact. He flinched, and for the first time, he looked at me. "I know," he said, and his voice cracked. "And I should have." "I'm so sorry." We stood in a heavy silence, the rain drumming against the large windows. Then he slowly pulled a crumpled envelope from his jacket pocket. It was a twin to the one I had found in the cabin. "Grandma gave me this," he said. "He wrote me a letter, too." He swallowed hard. "It wasn't as nice as yours, I'm guessing. But it was honest." He looked up at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. He saw what they were doing to me, too. He said they were building me a throne on a foundation of sand. That by never letting me fail, they were guaranteeing I'd never learn how to stand. He said I was becoming a hollow echo of their own ambitions. I didn't speak, just listened as my brother finally found his own voice. His last line was, "Stop letting other people fight your battles, Leo. It's time to grow up, apologize to your sister, and build something that is truly yours." My throat tightened. "I am so sorry, Clara," Leo said again, and this time, the words were imbued with a lifetime of unspoken truth. "For everything. For the treehouse and the Jeep, and for every time I let them push you aside because it was just easier. It was easier to be the golden boy than to stand up to them and risk losing the sun." He let out a shaky breath. "The truth is, I've always been jealous of you. I'm 25 years old, and I've never truly earned a single thing in my life. You built all of this." He gestured around my loft. "Brick by brick. I don't even know how to lay the first one." There it was. Not a justification, but a confession. The prison of being the favorite was just furnished more comfortably. We sat down then, on my worn leather sofa, and we talked for hours. We talked about our childhood, seeing it for the first time not as rivals, but as two children cast in roles they never chose. Finally, after a long, comfortable silence, Leo said something that cracked the world open a little wider. "I'm using my inheritance to go back to school." I blinked, surprised. "Really? For what?" "I enrolled at the community college. I'm going to get my associates in computer science, then maybe transfer for a bachelor's in finance. I want to learn how to build things that are real, sustainable, not just ideas." He looked at me, a flicker of genuine hope in his eyes. "For the first time, I want to build something of my own." I felt a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. "I think Grandpa Arthur would be very proud of that," I said softly. Leo nodded, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down his cheek. "I know he would." And for the first time since we were children, building forts out of couch cushions, we hugged. It wasn't a perfunctory, holiday hug. It was real. Something earned. Something new. It has been 6 months since the day of the will reading. My parents have not spoken a word to me. After Leo announced his intention to go to school and refused their offers to invest his inheritance for him, they cut him off, too. He told me it hurt, but that it also felt like taking off a heavy coat he'd been forced to wear his entire life. He could finally breathe. As for me, I've stopped listening for the sound of their approval. It's a silence I no longer need to fill. I took a portion of my inheritance and worked with my firm, Viridian Grove, to establish a small grant fund. It's called the Arthur Ashworth Foundation, and it provides seed money and mentorship for young women in architecture and design, girls who are told they're strong enough to go it alone. I'm in therapy, untangling the knots of shame and inadequacy that I'd carried for decades. It's a messy, non-linear process, but I am learning to separate who I am from who my family told me I was. Leo is excelling in his classes. He sends me screenshots of his code, of his near-perfect grades on calculus exams. Sometimes I tease him, "Look at you, the new nerd in the family," and his laugh is always genuine. We have started a new tradition, sibling Sundays. Once a month, we meet at my loft or his small, new apartment to make pancakes, go for a hike in Forest Park, or just talk. We are slowly, carefully, building a bond that was never given the soil to grow. Grandmother Eleanor is our anchor, a quiet, constant source of wisdom and support. "You two are rewriting the story," she told us last week over tea. "Don't you dare stop now." And she is right. For so many years, I thought love meant shrinking, making myself smaller to keep the peace, sacrificing my own light so that someone else could shine brighter. I know now that isn't love. That is erasure. Real love is expansive. It creates space. It holds you accountable. It tells you the truth, even when it's hard. I didn't just inherit a stock portfolio and a savings account that day in the lawyer's office. I inherited my grandfather's faith in me. I inherited my voice. And I intend to use it to build a beautiful life.